All right. Good morning, everyone. I think we were expecting some more people, and people will probably be kind of rolling in as we get started. But I know that we have some virtual participants, so I want to make sure that we're starting promptly at 8:30. Good morning to everyone out there in the virtual land, and to you here. Thank you for being here. My name is Shannon Johns. I'm an education specialist at the Diagnostic Center, and I'll be talking a little bit more about who I am and what we do at the Diagnostic Center as we move forward. This is on the way here this morning, I was thinking about how I've been in this building a few other times doing trainings. And the first time on the way to the car, the training went well, but on the way to the car afterwards, I was carrying a box and I fell in the parking lot and it was a big giant mess. And then the second time I came, like none of my videos would play. And so I'm hoping that this third time's the charm today. I'm feeling stable on my feet. I don't have any videos to show you. So I think we're going to be good. So I'm ready to start fresh today. So if you're not familiar with us, the Diagnostic Center is part of the California Department of Education, and there are 3 diagnostic centers throughout the state. We are located in Fremont, and we cover the northern range, everything in red. There is one in Fresno, and I was just speaking with someone who's from Bakersfield. She was familiar with the one in Fresno. And then there's one down in LA that covers the southern part of the state. Our main job at the Diagnostic Center is to perform student assessments. So if a district has a student that maybe they need some new ideas for, if the team's kind of stuck, sometimes we get called in when maybe there's a difference between what the parents think and what the district thinks, and they want like a neutral pair of eyes to come in and kind of focus on what does the student need. They can request an assessment from us, and that comes through your district office. The parents fill out an application, the district fills out an application sent to us, and then based on questions you ask, specific questions you ask, a team is put together on our end in order to answer those questions. So I'm an education specialist. I work with speech therapists, school psychologists. We have clinical psychologists on staff, a behavioral pediatrician, and they put together the team that's right to answer the questions. So then we go into the school. We have the student come in if we need to do more extensive testing into our center, and we have housing available too if families are traveling from far. We have a couple apartments that they can use to stay. And we are all of our services are free because we are part of the California Department of Education. So remember us as a resource. We also do trainings such as this one, and we do projects, technical assistance projects, where we work in districts for longer periods of time with teachers in their classrooms to set up evidence-based programs, or we have programs that are like classes for speech therapists and classes for school psychologists. So you can find out more about us and what we do on our website. And if you have any questions, please let us know. We also have a Facebook page, and we're trying to post daily information pertaining to special education, research, interesting articles, things about what we're doing. And so we encourage you, if you're a Facebook user, to like our page and be part of our online community. We also have a page, the Ask a Specialist page is run through the Diagnostic Center, and this is where anyone can submit any questions that they have on any of these topics. And actually, we just added a inclusive education category that's not shown on this because it was after I created the slides. So if you have questions specifically about inclusive education, you can send those in, and then we respond to the questions, we post them here, and all of our archives from the past years are there, so if you're looking for information on a particular topic, you may be able to find it there. I don't know if anyone here was able to attend the session yesterday morning on evidence-based practices for students with autism, but the presenters there, one of them was the assistant director at the Diagnostic Center, Anne England. She and her colleague, Patty, presented on the evidence-based practices, and they also talked a lot about the organization that they're kind of in charge of, which is CAPTAIN, and it's run through the Diagnostic Center. And CAPTAIN is the place to go. This website is the place to go for any information pertaining to evidence-based practices for students with autism, and it's anything you want, any kind of resource you want, you can find on this site if you're looking for information about autism. Yesterday at their presentation, they shared a new document that is an infographic that looks closely at UDL and ASD. So if you're interested in that, check it out on the CAPTAIN website. Along with Captain, another one of the organizations that's kind of housed through the Diagnostic Center is PENT. And PENT is all about getting the information out there about positive behavior supports and strategies to use working with students who have challenging behaviors. So if you're looking for any information about behavior supports, the PENT website is a great place to look. Okay, so just a little bit about me, just a picture, some of my favorite things. I live in Fremont. I have a 3-year-old, and yeah, this just now you can see the pictures as my favorite things. So I grew up in the Sacramento area, and then I had my big adventure when I was 17 and I went to college in Boston. I went to Boston College where I studied, they called it intense special needs at the time. And it was also a dual program, so I also took classes for a general education credential as well. And then after graduation, I had to get out of there because it was just way too cold. And so I came home. And then here in California, I just pursued my credential in moderate severe special education. I started working in Newark. Hopefully if you're familiar with this area, and it's right up there by Fremont. And I taught a special day class for students with moderate to severe disabilities at the elementary level. Most of my students were grades like 2nd or 3rd to 6th grade, and I worked there for 13 years. When I did my student teaching, one of my placements was at a school in Massachusetts where it was a regular elementary school, and then it was kind of like having a county program where someone had rented a classroom for this class of students with pretty severe, profound disabilities within the school, but this was kind of a separate entity. It was its own little space. And when I was doing my student teaching, I thought it was kind of weird how this class was down the hallway and they really had nothing to do with the school. They weren't part of the school community. The teacher wasn't part of any of the things that were going on. The students weren't included in anything, and it just didn't feel right to me. And then when I got my job in a special day class, we didn't have an inclusion model of any sort at that time, but I knew I needed to be part of the community. I needed to get myself out there. I needed to make sure that we were seen as part of the school. So I always encourage new teachers to, get out there and go to all of the meetings, and I would go to the staff meetings, and I would join the committees, and I would help plan the talent show, and I was part of these things that really kind of helped me form relationships with the general education teachers. And then when I said, "So I've got this kid," they were like, "Okay, yeah, sure, no problem." And so then I did manage. All my students had a buddy class at their grade level that they would spend some time with. It depended on the student how much time they were there, but they were all out. And I think that that's so important, is just trying to be part of that, show up for after school events, do things that put you out there. I was part of the parent teacher club, I was there, and that really helped. We were part of that community. And then I heard stories about how when our students left this elementary school and went to the one middle school in Newark, that the students that came from our school were the ones that were really looking out for those kids with disabilities, and being models for their peers from other schools that didn't have that experience with any kind of inclusion of students in their classrooms. I went to Cal State East Bay to work on my master's, and I got my master's in, I'm not used to this microphone thing, hold on. I have this great teacher voice, and that's what I normally use. But because of the virtual participants, I've been told I need to use a microphone. So at Cal State East Bay, in their education specialist, mod severe master's program, their whole push is full inclusion. They want all the kids out there all the time, and that was the push. And so then I was kind of this black sheep because I taught a special day class, and it was constantly like, you got to get out of that classroom. You can't teach that classroom. Your students need to be out. And I understood that, and I did take a lot of that in, but I also felt like, well, that's not what they're doing here, and these kids still need a good teacher. So how do I start moving us that way, but I still need to be here. So I think that was kind of important in helping me kind of think about what was important to me and where I wanted it to go in the future. So then after I got my master's, I got my job at the Diagnostic Center, and this is my 6th year there. And I think it's interesting how just in those 6 years, we've seen an increase in the number of, in the number of assessment requests we're getting that are very like focused on inclusion. We have a student who is fully included, and we need help. How do we make this work? And I'm being pulled into a lot of those, and especially for the students with more moderate severe disabilities is more my specialty, but we are definitely seeing an increase in that. So I want to just get a little idea of who's here in the room with me. Do we have, how many of you are special education teachers? Most of you. Okay. Anybody a general ed teacher? Good. I'm glad. Thank you for being here. Yeah. Yay. Any administrators? Good. Parents? Paraprofessionals? Great. Welcome. Any other support providers that I'm leaving out? Yep. What's your role? Okay. Perfect. You too? Were you raising? Awesome. Okay, good. Just nice to get a feel for who you are. So I just want you to, and virtual participants, if you've got people sitting with you, just chat for like 2 minutes with the person next to you about when you think of inclusion, what kind of comes to your mind. I'm going to have just like 2 minutes about where you think you are and what your thoughts are about that. Come on in. Okay, just kind of wind up your sentences. We'll come back together. All right, do I have a couple volunteers if somebody wants to share something that they just chatted about very briefly? Something that you're thinking about when you think about inclusion and the movement toward more of it? Yes, thank you. Wonderful. She just shared for virtual people, if you couldn't hear, she just said that inclusion is more than sitting in a room. And I think that's so true. And we're seeing that a lot. Good morning. Yeah, thank you. Anybody else want to share a thought? Yes.
So my partner, my co-teacher and I, she's a special ed teacher, I'm a gen ed teacher. We co-teach in a fully inclusive class. We do have a big class, we have 28. She has 12 mod intensive, and I have 17 gen ed, and then one class. Ooh. Everything together. We have we have 3 paras. I have para push in, and then her supports come in at different times of the day.
Okay.
But we pushed, and we happy to say we're the only ones in our district that are doing it.
Good for you.
Set the standard and kind of be the model for being able to
San Ramon. So
being able to continue to do that. Like we've pushed for it for years.
Good.
Kinder, and she has 3 TK and 9 kinder. So it's been a challenge, but it's a challenge.
Well, it's great, and I really commend you for getting out there and pushing for it and trying, and because then you become a model and you're able to show other people how it can work. So these two people just shared they're a gen ed teacher, a special ed teacher at the kindergarten level, who have 28 students, 17 general education students, and 12, I think you said 12 students with disabilities in one room. And so they've been really pushing and working hard to improve, to kind of show how the co-teaching can work. So thank you for sharing that. Yes.
I'm an inclusion specialist at Matrices. It's my second year, but there's nobody else that is like facilitating. I'm the person that kind of travels from site to site, so that's how I do it. Mm-hmm. But then I guess my question is like, how do you get the whole like the district to become really inclusive?
Right.
Right. But how does that mesh, I guess?
Well, we'll be talking about that over the next hour and 15 minutes. So if we have, absolutely, thank you for just asking, how do we move this culture toward inclusion for all students when, you're just like one lone teacher who's like, we're going to do this. Like, how do we make that happen? Okay, yeah.
And I just wanted, one of the things that happens in our district too is when people hear inclusion, they don't hear a continuum. They hear full inclusion or co-teaching. And, it's a process that takes time, and there's different degrees of inclusion, that are right for every kid. So I think we need to also keep.
Yes, good reminder. It's a spectrum, and we're moving there. And everything, we can say, yeah, we're moving toward inclusion. This doesn't mean it's all going to happen right now, right? It's going to take time to move that direction. One thing I thought yesterday at the keynote in the afternoon, Michael Hingson, he made the comment. He said, "You're not trying to be inclusive. You are or you're not." And I thought that was like important to kind of think about. Like, yeah, we're moving toward inclusion. We may not be doing it perfectly, but let's use the language. Let's say we are an inclusive environment, and we're making it more so all the time, right? Not that we're trying, because if we're just trying, then we're not really, right? So I just thought that was a good point. So today we're just going to talk very briefly about some of the law research behind inclusive education, and then we're going to talk about some strategies and resources that can help support that and some tips for collaboration. Oops, I went backwards. Okay, I'm going to show you this. I left on your tables, there's a link to a Padlet. And if you're participating virtually, the Padlet is here, the URL is here. And if you go to that, you don't have to go right now, I'm going to show you here. You can see, so I've put tons of resources on here, and this is going to be kind of a dynamic thing. I'm hoping as I do more of these trainings and as I do more research and I learn more things to be putting more and more information up here. So if you guys have a great resource, email it to me and I'll add it up here because I just want this to be a place where you can go. And so any of these things, if you're not familiar with Padlet, it's kind of like a bulletin board, kind of similar to a Pinterest or something where you can post these links to documents or websites, and then when you click them, it goes right to them. So I have information here on the left side. It's kind of all this background stuff that we're going to be talking about very briefly, and more that we're not going to be talking about, but it's there. And then some of the websites, like I just talked about, for Diagnostic Center are in the next column. We've got our website, Ask a Specialist, Captain, and Pent, and then some other things I'm also going to be talking about. And then some example the handout from today is here, and then some other things we're going to be talking about. So it's all here, and I will add to it. When I first designed kind of this training, it was to be a webinar. And I did a webinar last year with several counties and districts and SELPAs, and it was an hour and a half webinar, but I had given them about 3 hours of pre-reading, videos, and articles and stuff. All of that information is here. So we're not going to go through all of that today, but if you want some more stuff to look through, it's here on the Padlet. Back in here. Every time I make a transition from one screen to the next, I'm certain it's all going to fall apart. Okay, good. Okay. So just a review of some of this basic background information that we know, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we know that IDEA says that students who receive special education services should be learning in their least restrictive environment. And we know that LRE really isn't a place, it's a program. It's their programming. And the team has to work together to determine what's really the most appropriate programming for the student. And, the language is maximum extent that is appropriate. And that's can be difficult to kind of figure out exactly what that means because it's a little subjective and can be hard to define. But we know that in 2013, a group of people came together to look at why some of our students, most of our students with disabilities were really having having poor outcomes when they left school and poor post-secondary outcomes. And they came together, this task force was formed to look at why is this happening? What are we doing? What could we be doing differently? And then in 2015, they released this report, the One System report. And hopefully you've looked at it. Maybe you're familiar with this. If not, I encourage you, it's on the Padlet, look through it. It's a 100-page huge document. There's a lot of really good information in there. And really the big point and what this report says in the end is that it's really important for our students with disabilities to be educated with their peers without disabilities. And so that's what's kind of driven this push that we're seeing in California toward this one system of education for all students. And there's going to be, and that's kind of that feeling you're feeling like, oh, this is just how I feel, but how do I move everyone there? It's going to be a process that everyone is moving in that direction. And I think there's going to be some change. Well, there are going to be some changes too in the credentialing program and in the credentialing programs for general education teachers to give them more information so that they're more comfortable and they feel like they have information that will help them serve the students that are included in their classrooms. So we're familiar with response to intervention. You may know that they changed it to response to instruction intervention. They added the instruction piece to make it RTI squared. And this is really a general education approach to high quality instruction, early intervention, and using behavior strategies to meet the needs of students. So again, there's lots of more information about RTI squared on the Padlet if you want to read more about it. But we know that it's important because it's really looking at strategies we use in the general education environment to meet the needs of all the students. So it's going to meet the needs of the general ed students and the needs of the students that have been identified as students with disabilities. RTI squared is one component of MTSS, or the multi-tiered system of supports. And MTSS is really a framework that looks at aligning RTI squared with the California state standards, which are based on the Common Core standards. The MTSS is really about looking closely at the academic, social, and behavioral needs of all of the students on campus. And a lot of districts are really moving through this MTSS process right now. I'm sure you know that acronym. And really trying to consider how to serve these students with disabilities in the general education environment and to meet the needs of all the general ed students who have all of their needs as well. On the Padlet, there are two videos. One is about MTSS and meeting academic needs, and one is about MTSS and looking at behavioral needs. So I encourage you to check out those videos if you'd like more information on that. So then in 2015, we know President Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act. Was the No Child Left Behind revamped into ESSA. And if you look at the website now, there are starting to be some changes are noted of things that have changed with the new administration. And I'm assuming we're going to see more and more changes over the years. So we'll see how that changes. But really, the focus of ESSA and how it applies to inclusion and to us is that it ensures access to general education curriculum for students with disabilities. And it ensures that concepts of UDL, Universal Design for Learning, are being used in these classrooms. So those are two big pushes that are part of ESSA that are very applicable to what we're talking about today. Good morning. No worries. Okay, and then we've got Universal Design for Learning. Again, I have lots of information, more videos, articles about this, and links to some of the CAST website and things like that on the Padlet. At yesterday's keynote with Dr. Blackerby of CAST, he said, he talked a lot about this, and so hopefully you're able to hear his talk on that. And really these guidelines are for all students. Again, they're not just for our students with disabilities, they're for all the students. And I saw a quote, it was a picture posted, infographic quote posted by Brooks Publishing. If you are a Facebook user, follow them because they put lots of cool stuff up there. One of the quotes was, UDL is not a checklist of things to do. It's a new lens for thinking about everything you do. And I think that's really true. When we're thinking about UDL, it's not about fixing the way we teach. It's about from the initial design of our lessons, thinking about how all of the students are going to be able to access it. Oh, the Brooks Publishing Company Facebook page? Yeah. They have lots of good stuff on there. Okay, so when we talk about like, what do we do, right? We've got this push, we've got all this, everyone's telling us we need to include these students more in the general education environment. What are our next steps? And I feel like a lot of people are feeling like this, right? It's just totally overwhelming. And I think that's kind of what you were describing over here when you were talking about how I have these ideas, but how do I make everyone agree with me and do it, right? And I think like, we just have to start. And we just have to try. Like you guys saying, you know, we're just doing it. We told them we want to do it. We kept pushing for it. And now we're doing the co-teaching and we're going to figure out how to make it work and then be an example for other people about how it can work. So we're going to talk about some different resources that I have here. I like this quote. This is kind of like what you said about it's not just being in the room. Inclusion is not simply about proximity. It is about intentionally planning for the success of all students. In order for inclusion to be successful, we know that we have to plan for it, and we have to work together and we have to collaborate a lot. So some of you may be familiar with the levels of participation in content that are described by Michael Giangreco. He talks about how when we've got these students in the general education environment, they can participate at these different levels. We may have students who are doing basically the same thing as the other students in the classroom. Maybe some minor modifications are being made to the activities. We may have students that are being involved in the same curricular area, but they're focused on different objectives at different levels based on their needs. So maybe most of the students are working on division and this student's working on his subtraction, okay? Curriculum overlap, students are working on a lot of the same lessons, but they're pursuing goals in different curricular areas within that lesson. So the example here is a student is working on their range of motion, communication skills, and socialization skills in this science class, and then the other students are working on their science goals. And then finally, there are this alternative participation where students are working on goals unrelated to what their classmates are pursuing. Sometimes that happens in the general education environment, or maybe they are moved to another room to work on those things. And I think that this is where I think maybe I might get a little pushback from some people in the inclusion community, that there are some people that think that if these students are being included in the general education classroom, they need to be doing exactly what the other students are doing, because that's the goal, is for them to have exposure to this general education curriculum, and that's why we've got them there. And I think that, yeah, as much as we can, yes, and a student, especially with our students with more maybe mild, moderate needs, really looking at these first couple levels, how can we make sure we're giving them access to this curriculum and we're, getting them exposure and we're helping them develop these academic skills that they can develop. But I think, and of course it's really important to have those high expectations, but I think at some point, especially when we're talking about students with more moderate, severe, profound disabilities, we really need to consider whether we're spending the time on the things they really need, and if we're helping them develop the skills they need to be as independent as possible in the future. And that's always my push with the moderate severe population that I work with. How do we help them be as independent as they can be? What do they need to know when they leave school at 22? How do we get them prepared for that? And starting at the very, in preschool, we're working on those skills that are going to get them there. I did an assessment for a student way up in Modoc County about 4 years ago, and he's a student with Down syndrome, included in a general education classroom. And I guess he was 8 or so the first time I saw him. Mom really wanted him in there all the time. She really wanted to focus on the general education curriculum. She wanted him learning these academic skills. And when he was 8, we kind of said, well, yeah, you can keep working on some of those things, but let's also think about other things he needs to work on, his social skills, his functional skills. Like, let's think about those as well. But yeah, let's try this for a little while longer. He's younger, but we want to always keep that eye toward the future. But then I actually got called to go back out there. I was out there last week, and now he's in middle school. And he really hasn't developed a lot of new academic skills in those years, right? He's relatively lower functioning, and he's struggling with academic skills. I sat and watched him in this language arts class where the students were sitting in a group, and they were reading from a chapter book, and they were talking about vocabulary. They were reading a book called The Contender that I'm not familiar with, but they were vocabulary like tenement and all these words and he just sat there, and then he is like playing with his pencil and he's bugging the kids next to him. getting up and running around the room. And they're like, why is he doing that? I'm like, because he has no idea what's going on in this lesson. And it's not applicable to his life, and it's not meaningful. And what's the point? So when I met with the team, that's what I kept going back to. I said, okay, think about his day. Think about each class he's in. And as a team, think about why he's there. Is he there to learn to read? Is he there for social skills? Like, what's the point? And then make a plan for that period. Figure out what he needs to be focusing on. And this is, he's 13, 12, and he needs to work on those skills. I don't want him sitting there while they're reading the Contender chapter book. I'd rather he's working on some really functional reading skills. Let's have his daily schedule. Let's have him reading the, words and pictures matched together, looking at what his day is going to be like. Let's look at reading a recipe. Let's work at a shopping list and going out into the community. Those are the kinds of things I would like to see him working on. And so I was kind of just encouraged them to think about it that way. And I could kind of see a change starting to happen in Mom, where she was realizing, yeah, I want him to be as independent as he can be. And so I think we just kind of always need to keep that lens and think about that while we're thinking about what level of participation we want for our students. So we know that no matter what level of participation of content we're talking about, we want to, the goals always need to be in alignment with standards, right? We know that. Little plug for Diagnostic Center, we do a the education specialists work together to do a goal writing symposium. We got lots of people saying, our teachers need help writing goals. How, can you help us with that? So the last 2 years we've done these and we've held them in Fremont, and this year we're taking our show on the road. They've invited to house us at Marin. So on December 5th in Marin County, we're doing our symposium. So it's an all-day session. We start in the morning talking about standards as a full group, and then we break in the afternoon into more topic-specific, or student-specific. So like I lead a group for writing goals for students with moderate severe disabilities. One of my colleagues who's really into behavior works on looking at behavior goals. We've got someone who works on more of the mild moderate side, looking at reading or math. So if that's something of interest to you, there's a registration link on our website. So you can find out more information there, or send me an email if you have more questions about that. But as part of our goal writing symposium, we talk a lot about how do we write these goals that are aligned to the standards and meet the students' needs. So we say, we have these steps. First, you want to look very closely at the assessment data. Determine what are the students' strengths and their areas of weakness. Prioritize the area of needs. And then always that question, what is the best use of the student's time in school? From there, you can determine the goal area and what you want that student to be focusing on. Then I encourage you to write the goal, then look back at the standards to think about where the connection is. I think that's easier than trying to say, well, here's a standard. We have to write a goal to this specific standard and then trying to connect it to the kid. Think about the kid's needs, what they need to be focusing on, then find a way to attach it to a standard. We want them to be grade level standards whenever possible, of course, and that is easier in the ELA strand because it's easy to look kind of back several grades and see what that on that continuum. It's a little harder in math, where like I always, my lens is always the moderate severe lens, but if we're thinking about like money and time and really functional math skills, that's only in like second grade. And you may have a middle school or high school student who needs to work on the skills, and that's where you get to check that other box that on the IEP form that says that it addresses other needs resulting from the disability. Were any of you here last year for this conference? So hopefully, if you were, you got to see Dr. Villa speak. That was the highlight of the conference for me last year. If you go to the Inclusion Collaborative website, you can find links to their YouTube channel, and they have videos of people who presented last year and the year before that. And if you aren't familiar with Dr. Villa, I do encourage you to watch his keynote. He really is inspiring. And I've kind of started using one of his forms, especially that we're going to be looking at today. He talks a lot about, these are just a few notes from his talk that kind of resonated with me. He talked about the idea of how UDL is not about retrofitting, going back and fixing the way, looking at how we always do this lesson and how can we fix it, but being proactive and using those strategies from the beginning in designing our lessons. I liked his quote about we don't need to sit at meetings and admire the problem. He talks a lot about how we get together and we all sit around and talk about how bad this certain issue is. And he talks about everyone coming to terms with that before you go to the meeting and then sitting down at the meeting and just focusing on what you're going to do about it. Collaboration is to inclusion as location is to real estate. We know that, right? Collaboration is so important. And then his big thing is focusing on the student's strengths. How is the student smart? What are the students' interests? And how do we use that to help them be involved in the general education curriculum? So he has this form that is got this crazy long name, using the power of 2 or more, student and class mismatch and solution brainstorm worksheet. I'm going to show you some examples. This form is kind of intense, and the first time I filled it out, it took me a long time. As I've done it more and more, it kind of becomes easier. And you're obviously not going to. And when I suggest this to teams, you're not going to sit down and do this for every lesson. But if there's a lesson or two that are kind of routine kinds of structures to how you do things in a classroom, that's the good kind of lesson to use. Sit down as a team and walk through it. It'll kind of give you some ideas for how you can include the student in the activity. So I'm going to go to the Padlet and pull up an example. Okay, so his form, first you start in the left column, and you're looking at just facts about the student. Who is this student? So this is one that I created as an example for a school team on a student I was assessing to kind of show them how they could use it. We knew this student wanted to do things for himself. He had some emerging early academic skills. This was a kindergartner. His interests, he really was very interested in, he was socially motivated, and he loved to use his iPad. He was a visual learner, kinesthetic, and his important relationships, he was very close to his paraprofessional and had a good relationship with his resource teacher as well. Goals and concerns. He was functioning below age grade level expectations, severely impaired speech language skills, communicates through his behavior. He had a lot of behaviors going on, and difficulty interacting appropriately with his peers. He was very interested in them, but he didn't really know how to interact with them appropriately. And then just other information, he does have an iPad that he uses throughout the day. So then you pick a lesson or a class or something that's happening. And, Dr. Villa was really good about saying, we're not being critical here at all. This isn't about being critical. Not being critical of the teacher, it's not being critical of the lesson, it's not being critical of the student's behavior or anything like that. It's just thinking, what are the facts? What is happening in this classroom? So the lesson, these students were reading a short grade level text about taking care of your teeth. It was dental week. They were completing an art project. It was this construction paper mouth with teeth. And then they had a sentence frame that they were completing. I will take care of my teeth by, and then there were suggested answers listed up on the whiteboard. Content demands. You had to be able to read this short grade level text. You had to be able to cut, glue, and follow the model to create the art project. You had to choose an answer from the board, how you wanted to take care of your teeth, and then you had to complete the sentence frame. The product demands is how the students are graded, what's the point at the end, what's going to happen. They're going to turn their art project in and their sentence that they've completed. And process demands, it was all independent work. They were all working on their own. Dr. Villa kind of had us do this in our table groups during his session. He put some information about a student on the board, and he said, talk about each of these steps. And he says, when you get to the, just write everything down, especially when we get to the last category, write down everything you think. There's no good or bad answers. Just put it all out there. We know that so we're looking at the mismatches, right? So what are the mismatches between this lesson and the student's abilities? This student can read some words by sight, but he can't read this entire grade level text by himself. He needs assistance to cut, glue, and put together an art project like this. He's unable to choose a written answer from the board to complete a sentence frame. He can't copy his chosen answer onto his paper, and he really needs assistance in focusing on some kind of independent project like this. So then this is the point where he said, just put down all the answers. Anything that comes up at your table, write it down. He said that they use this a lot. When he was an administrator, he would use it at staff meetings. He'd pick one teacher a week, and he'd say, like, what's one of the problems you're dealing with right now? And then she would, he or she would tell him. And then he'd start the staff meeting by saying, okay, this teacher is having this issue with this kid. What are some ideas? Write them down. And all the teachers would write down some ideas, and just in a 5-minute period, and then they'd all give them to her, right? They weren't all great, but when she left the meeting, she had a bunch of things to try. So it's just kind of like making yourself think about how can we make this better. So these are some ideas. You could adapt the grade level text and pair pictures with words. You can have the peer read the story with him. Cut out the art materials ahead of time. Provide him with a sample of a completed art project at his desk for him to reference. Have a buddy help him put the art project together. You could provide him with pictures of 3 different things he could do to take care of his teeth and allow him to pick one and glue it onto his sentence frame. And then he's at that social thing that he likes, and this is part of it too, thinking about their interests, thinking about their strengths, incorporating that into these ideas. He was very social, so giving him an opportunity to walk around and share his project when he was done. So this is just kind of a way of like really staying focused on who the student is, what are the student's needs, what's the class doing, and what are some possible ideas to help him or her participate in the activity. So I have on the Padlet, I've got his form, and then I have 3 examples. So we aren't going to go through them all right now, but you can look at them later if you would like. I do think, like, sometimes when I show that form at a conference or in a training, everyone's like, oh, it looks like a lot of work. And it is. I acknowledge that. But it really can help get you there and get some ideas flowing. And you're not obviously going to sit down and do it for every lesson. But it will kind of, and some of the things you come up with for this activity will apply to other activities in the classroom. Okay. All right, I've been talking a lot, I'm going to give you a few minutes to talk to each other. We're going to talk briefly about co-teaching next, and I just want you to talk a little bit with someone sitting next to you about what co-teaching is not and what it is. Think about it a little bit, and then we're going to talk about it. All right, everyone, we'll come back together. If anybody wants to share something about they were talking about co-teaching. Yes. I'm gonna pass this around so I don't have to paraphrase everybody again.
Co-teaching is not one teacher being an assist.
Yes. And often that's what it turns into, right? And so there are different models, and then we'll be talking about some of them. But yes, you're right. Anybody else?
Co-teaching is like two teachers actually all looking at the students' stuff together and analyzing what the needs are.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's the hope, right? Anybody else? How many of you I know you guys are doing co-teaching. Anybody else in here doing co-teaching or have co-teaching kind of starting in their districts or counties or where they're working? You are kind of popping in and helping some of these kids when you go to check on them? That's great. If you can get those, pull a small group, but pull some of those, because there's always the gen ed kids that are in there kind of struggling too, right? Yes. Oh, I should be doing it this way so I don't have to repeat.
I was going to say co-teaching is pre-planned and collaborative, because I know in the effort to get more inclusion, there are a lot of districts where they're just saying, get those kids in there, and kind of go help out. And it's not working. It needs to be pre-planned and a collaborative thing.
Yes. Planning, collaboration, right? Oh, that's like what we all need. But then we also just need a lot more hours, right? That's what everybody always comes back to. But when? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I can't add more time to the day, unfortunately. So we know, I don't know, were any of you able to go to the co-teaching session yesterday with Dr. Karj? So she very fast went through like 11 different models of co-teaching. And I'm going to talk about 4 today, but she mentioned like 11 different ones. And if you are in co-teaching, you're interested in co-teaching, I encourage you to check out her materials, her session materials, and there's lots of information in there. But really, yeah, in order for co-teaching to work and to work well, you need that relationship, lots of planning time, lots of communication. Last year I was able to go, they do a lot of co-teaching at Woodside High School, and I got to go kind of observe, and that was really fun to just watch and see what they're doing. They've been doing it for a long time. And their key, they say, is that it really comes from the superintendent believes this is important. And then that filters down to the administrative level, and then it filters down to the schools. And that's what it's taken to get them where they are. And so I used to feel that too when I was trying to push to get my students out as a teacher. And I'd have a principal who was like, yeah, that's a good idea. But if his boss wasn't saying it was a good idea too, we were really struggling. So we need to educate the superintendent level and make sure that they understand the importance of this and moving that way. But the teachers at Woodside High School they had about a quarter students with disabilities in their classrooms, and then they had a special ed teacher and a gen ed teacher in the room. And it was cool when I was observing one of the rooms. We were being escorted by a program specialist, and at one point we were watching the lesson, and I leaned over. I'm like, "Which one's the special ed teacher?" She says, "I'm not going to tell you. You figure it out." And I couldn't tell. I honestly couldn't tell, and I think that's what makes it really good. They're working together on the content. They're working together on supporting the students, and that was pretty cool to see. And if you guys could become a model and bring people in to see what you're doing. We need to get out there and see it work in order to understand how to make it happen. So the 4 models I'm talking about here are models that were described by Dr. Villa, and his website, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, his website is on the Padlet, and if you go on his website, he has links to all of his PowerPoints and all of his trainings, and there's so much good information in there. So I recommend you check that out. So the 4 models he talks about are supportive teaching, And that's where one teacher takes the lead instructional role and the other student is walking around and supporting, which is kind of what we were saying. Well, but as long as that person also has a teaching role along the way too. But in this model, that co-teacher is taking the supportive role, watching and listening, stepping in to provide that one-on-one tutorial assistance when needed. And then, but I would hope that would kind of go back and forth. You would take turns being the one that's leading the class, the lesson. Parallel teaching, that's when you've got at least 2 groups going on and you're teaching the same content in smaller groups. And the groups are heterogeneous. The teachers may rotate among groups. Sometimes there might be a third group that's doing more independent work and you can move between. Complementary teaching is the third one he talks about, and that's one teacher is teaching and the other one is providing extra information in some way. So one teacher might be teaching while the other one is kind of paraphrasing what she's saying or modeling how to take notes. Sometimes it's some pre-teaching where the complementary teacher is pulling a group and kind of going over what they're going to be talking about and practicing or leading students through the lesson. And then team teaching. And really, this is the goal, right? We want to, I mean, when we're talking about co-teaching, like this is where we want teachers to get to. They're doing 2 or more people, 2 people doing what the traditional teacher has always done. Planning, teaching, assessing, and assuming equal responsibility for all of the students in the classroom. They want to share that leadership, share the responsibilities, and the instruction really should move back and forth. And that's what I got to observe when I went to these classrooms, that, you know, they were really just tag teaming through the lesson, and that was really cool to see. Okay, we've got a couple of matrices we're going to look at. One of them is one that we often recommend at the Diagnostic Center that probably looks a lot like ones you've seen in the past. And then one is it's on the Inclusion Collaborative website. I don't know this person, Katie Engelter. Is she still here? Does she work here? Okay. Well, I saw her form online and I think it's great. So we're going to be looking at these 2 different kinds of matrices now that can help with kind of looking at designing the day. So this is the one that we often use at the Diagnostic Center. And this is like looking at how are we going to work on the students' goals all day long. Again, anytime we have one of these forms, yeah, they're a lot of work. But you put the time in, you create this document, then it really helps, especially if you have students who are supported by paraprofessionals, because the paraprofessional can have this document and knows exactly what that student is supposed to be working on throughout all of the activities of the day. So in the left-hand column, you'd have all of the activities, and then across the top, we don't go into specific goals, but more broad goal areas. Communication, independence, social skills, motor, academics. And ideally, this form is one that's kind of completed by the whole team. So the teacher may take the lead, fill in the academic section, put in some, independent stuff, maybe has some ideas for social skills, and then email it to the speech therapist and have the speech therapist fill in boxes and check in with the OT or PT. If they have a vision specialist, anybody who's involved, the adaptive PE teacher, have them fill it out too. And then ideally it would be kind of a living document that's updated as things change. Or like I encourage, when there is a paraprofessional, I say like, write on it. Say like, okay, he can't do this at all. What can we do about that? And then it kind of is a way of communicating back with the case manager. Or he can do this. Now what do we do next? Right? So that we're kind of constantly looking at changing and moving the student forward. So I'm going to go out to the Padlet. Okay, so there's a blank matrix here, and then I've got a couple examples. I'll just pull one up to show you. Often when I recommend one of these matrices to a team, I will fill it out for a couple activities just to give them kind of an idea of what it would look like. So this one was filled out for a student, and it's, you can see I just did it for a couple activities: arrival, ELA, recess. So you can see, so you could pick any of these categories and like look down, but we see for this student, so this kind of shows how they're working on these skills all day long. And I think this can be a helpful tool if you've got a parent who's like, we want 70 hours of speech a week. Like, okay, well, that can't happen, but look at how we're going to work on communication all day long. You know, when he's arriving in the morning, he's going to greet staff and peers and say hi. He's going to share a message on a pre-programmed voice output device about something that happened at home. He's going to communicate preferences by making choices. In language arts, again, he's going to be making choices about which activities he would like to do. He's going to share the sentence that he writes using this adaptive word processing software. So you can put it all in there. How they're doing it, you know, what it looks like, have it all embedded in this document. Then the paraprofessional or anyone working with him knows. And I like to always include the recess here because there's a lot going on at recess. We can really help these students work on their communication skills, work on their social skills. You can even find ways to embed some academic stuff in there. And it's happening, every day, but often they go out to recess and it's like, they just kind of let them go, everyone just goes free, and sometimes there's problems. But this is an important instructional time. And so if you have it kind of laid out exactly what they can work on during recess, it can become a more structured, beneficial time for them. Okay, so those couple examples are there. I won't read through everything, but you guys can look at that. Okay. So this next matrix that I saw, it was called an activity matrix for inclusion. And it was, as I said, on the Inclusion Collaborative website. It was created by Katie Engelter. And so what she designed here is just kind of looking at this activity. So they have their activity was reading. What is the class goal? What's the child's goal? What modifications are needed? What are the responsibilities of the paraprofessional working with the student? And then a notes column. So you could say like, this is what's working, this is what's not working, and keep notes there. So in this example, you can see that the activity in the classroom is reading. Their whole class is working on reading independently for 20 minutes. So she decided this student is going to read independently for 10 minutes and then take a 5-minute break. That's what this student was working on. The modifications that are needed, the student needed a simplified book that had some large print in it. And then the para responsibilities. Para will modify the reading passages. It was written that way. I added the little piece in brackets, under the teacher's direction, so that the child uses it uses child's vocabulary. We want the paras to help with those things. That's great, but we want to make sure that they're doing it under direction and assistance from the teacher in determining how they're going to be adjusting that language. So this form, I found that example. The website's there where I found it, but you could recreate this easily and use it for lots of activities during the school day. I briefly want to mention assistive technology. We're not going to be talking about it a lot. It's kind of its own training. But there's so much out there, right? There's so many great programs, great software. We got to hear a little bit about some of the things coming out of CAST yesterday at the keynote. There's so many apps for everything. Even when we're talking about assistive technology, we're even talking about low-tech things that we can do too, providing pictures and everything down to like a pencil grip, right? But I just think it's really important to kind of always be keeping the technology in mind when we're thinking about how to help students access curriculum, because sometimes presenting it to them in a different way, using technology, can really help with their engagement and their understanding. Do we have any early childhood people in here? Yeah. So you may be familiar with the Connect modules. Connect works primarily with the birth to 5, I believe, preschool level. But they have a form. Let me go back out again. they have a module on their website that is all about assistive technology. And even though it's geared toward the younger kids, there's some good information in there. So I do recommend checking out that module. And it's on the, I think it's over here. Yeah, there, the module. Yeah, this is the the link to the modules is here. And then up here, I have this form. So they have put out this assistive technology planning tool that kind of helps, again, walk you through the steps of thinking about how assistive technology could help the student in that classroom. So they, at the top there, have that learning or participation goal. What is currently happening? What would you like to see happen? And then kind of walk you through the steps. How can we change the environment? Does the environment need to be changed? What can we do to help that? What equipment could we provide? Can the activity itself be changed? Or do we need to change the materials? Do we need to change the schedule? How can we adapt the instructions? And kind of always keeping that AT lens on when we're thinking about that. And then on the bottom, how will you support the child in using AT? So just want to give you more and more resources. Another tool you could use when you're thinking about assistive technology in the classroom. So we've mentioned, we've all talked about it many times about the importance of collaboration and how, inclusion is not going to work if we're not all talking to each other. And we need that frequent collaboration. And I think it's really important, especially those of us with our special ed hats on, to always think about how we can support those gen ed teachers, because we want this to be successful and we want them to develop their skills. And I was speaking, actually she just stepped out, but the woman over here was talking about how, often the general ed teachers are I don't know what to do. And she's like, you do though, trust your gut. It's she was saying that sometimes it's all of a sudden this kid in their class has this special ed label and they think they have to do everything different. And they're like, no, you know how to teach kids, right? It comes back to that. But I think often the general education teachers get feel that they don't have the knowledge that they need. And I think sometimes a lot of it has to do with the behavior supports, right? I think often that's the concern. I have a good friend who started teaching at the same time I did. She's been teaching a long time. She's a kindergarten teacher. And she called me last week and she's like, oh my gosh, Shannon, I've got this student and he's autistic. And I've had autistic kids before, but this one, he's just so different. And I just don't know what to do and nothing is working and he's running away. And how do I chase him when I've got my class? And she was just kind of spiraling and really upset. But then she said, I've never received any training in autism. I have no idea what to do. And part of me was okay, first of all, you've had these kids before. You do know what to do. You're going to be okay. You're a good teacher. But I think that feeling, especially, with some of our teachers who've been teaching longer, who maybe haven't had the same credentialing programs that students are having now as they come out, they feel sometimes that they don't have that information. So how can we support them? How can we provide them with more resources or give them more information so that they feel okay, this is doable? But it all, really comes back to that collaboration. And I was supporting a teacher in San Leandro last year who had a student with pretty significant, profound needs who was fully included, and she was the resource specialist. And she was really struggling with how do we meet all his needs all day, and I don't have time because I've got all these other students. And when I asked her, I said, well, what does the speech therapist think about how you can help him with his communication in the classroom? She said, I don't know. I never get to talk to her. What is the behavior analyst telling you should do in order to help, build the positive behaviors in the student? She's like, I never get to talk to the behavior analyst. And I think that's really the case. That's what's happening all over the place because everyone's so busy. And so that's why it's so important to come up with some set ways that you will communicate. Yes, did you have a question?
And they don't have any services yet because they're you know, that's when at least she reached out. And then I would just give her my advice from being a teacher and special ed so long.
Right.
And so we just created this little toolbox for a break. Because I could see the little boy, he was acting out, but he didn't really know how to act, right? So you have to teach him how to do it right. So I showed her a little like star chart like thing, and then like every time he did something good, just, you know, like a behaviorist would.
Right.
And now it's perfect.
So sometimes the teachers just need someone to like brainstorm with, and that's exactly what I did with my girlfriend. Like I just like, let's just come up with some ideas. And sometimes that's what, and sometimes that's just informal communication. But I do think like as a team, kind of thinking about what are our preferred methods of communication, you know, what needs to be done in person, what can be discussed by phone or email or text message, how frequently do you need to meet? What I recommended to this teacher I was working with was, you know what, you guys need to maybe try putting like a quarterly or each trimester putting something on the calendar at the beginning of the year that like is a time you're going to get together to talk about this kid. Because sometimes if it's on the calendar, it happens. If it's not, it never happens, right? But coming up with that, like, especially if there's a para involved, like when are you going to check in with the paraprofessional? When are you going to be able to talk to the general ed teacher to work on any adaptations or modifications to curriculum? When are you going to be able to have this time? And you know, that's as I said earlier, that's like that's the thing that always comes back to when I give this training. It's like, but what do we do about time? And it's hard. It's really hard. But hopefully that's one thing when administrators ask me what they can do to help, you know, move this way. I always encourage like helping your teachers find that time as much as you can, which is also as hard as an administrator to do, but supporting them in that way to help them have the time for the collaboration, because it's not going to work without the collaboration piece. This is, I'd mentioned Brooks Publishing earlier. Their Facebook page is pretty fun. They're always posting cool stuff, but they put up this infographic and I put it here, I believe, somewhere. You saw it? There it is. Let me see if it will come up. Sometimes these like infographics are like fun because they're fun to look at and they're kind of quick snapshots, but they have these 10 teamwork tips that I thought were pretty cool. Keeping it smallish and looking at the teams you're putting together to talk, making that commitment to meet, holding those regular meetings, sharing your agenda ahead of time and being prepared for those meetings, bringing snacks because everyone likes that, establishing those communication guidelines, making decisions by consensus, and then having that following through, making sure people are all doing the things that they said they would do, and then celebrating when, you know, the little things too and the big things that are working for your team and for your student. So that could be a tool, just something you could share with people when you're talking about this. All right. I do have a note here. I find a lot when I go into these schools and classrooms where these students are being included and they have paraprofessional support, that a lot is being left to the paraprofessional. And we need to make sure that we are supporting those paraprofessionals and that the teachers are designing the instruction and creating the activities and doing the adaptations. And you may ask the para to help you and say, this is what I want it to look like. Can you help do this? Or this is how I want, you know, this kind of activity to be structured for the student, and give them some, you know, wiggle room in how they're going to do that. But I think that guidance is very important. And their job is to implement these programs that have been designed by the teacher. I worked with I was assessing a student, and the paraprofessional would pull the student out to do academic instruction throughout the day. And I said, so the teacher gave you these activities? And she's like, no, I just come up with stuff. And that's not her job. And she's not paid for that. And doesn't have the credential that we do. And so I just think that's really important to keep in mind and make sure that those paraprofessionals are being given the support that they need, and so that you're communicating with them regularly. Okay, so just another, we've looked at it very closely together. So you've already seen the Padlet, and it is there. And as I said, I will be continuing to add to that. I wasn't exactly sure how long we need. Do we have some questions? And otherwise, I'm going to give you some time to kind of think through some of these things. We have talked about lots of strategies. I've given you some different tools you can use. So maybe give you a few minutes to kind of think to yourself or to talk to people sitting next to you about one of these things that you think you might be able to put into place. The Dr. Villa form, talking about a move toward co-teaching, looking at the activity matrices, thinking about assistive technology, or just kind of thinking about how you can improve your communication as a team and your collaboration. Or just kind of discussing student needs and how you can help them be more supported and to be successful. So I'm going to let you have some time to do that. And also, I am here for questions, or if you guys want to talk about anything, just ask me a question. Otherwise, yeah, I'm here. Thank you. You guys know I was talking about the goal symposium. Just one more thing. I was talking about the goal symposium that we're doing, and she was just asking me about where to find the information. So on the Diagnostic Center webpage, on the right-hand side, you can see down here, it says Goal Writing Symposium. And if you click that, it will give you the link to register. And again, that's on December 5th in Marin County, the district office, I think. Information's on the website.